Hi guys, and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Today we are going to talk about integrated amplifier for driving your speakers called Dayens Menuetto. And this one is made here in Serbia by the company named Dayens. They're not new on the market. They have been building electronics and speakers for at least some 20 years, I believe. It's just not something that I personally care about, but they are not new on the market. They have tradition and they are quite highly valued here in my country. But I didn't get this one from the manufacturer. I actually got it from a friend of mine, a countryman here, that bought it secondhand, and he was kind enough to loan it to me for a review. By the way, this model has been around for some time now. I think I have seen some mainstream media reviews like some 13, 14 years ago, but important thing to notice is that even though they didn't change the name, the model, they actually did iterate and improve on the design slightly with time. They just kept the same name and the same design. But the important thing is that this model is the current version of the amp. So if you go and purchase the new one, it will be the one that I'm describing. That said, the price depends on the configuration that you opt for. For example, the most affordable one I think goes for 900 euros, which would be slightly below 1000 US dollars. And that is the version that doesn't have a remote control. And also in the back, you can see that there are quite decent, massive set of binding posts, and there are RCA posts. This is the default standard, most affordable version. Then you can opt to have a remote control motorized potentiometer, and that's a little bit more expensive, I think around 100 euros and US dollars. Then you can pimp the unit with WBT low mass connectors, and I think also RCAs. I'm not sure about this, but fully upgraded, fully pimped version with a remote control and motorized pot is around 1200 euros or 1300 US dollars. And this is a class AB design, which offers 50 watts of power into 8 ohms and 70 watts into 4 ohms. So on paper that doesn't seem like much, but wait for the sound impressions because, yeah, specs can be tricky. Before that, quick mention of the build quality. It's made out of metal sheets. They're not something like thick and premium. It's normal thinner metal sheets like on the amplifiers of old. And the front panel is acrylic glass, I believe, acrylic plastic, something like that. It looks really nice, as you can see. Knobs are made out of aluminum, volume knob on the left, selector on the right that lets you choose between 4 analog inputs, and all of inputs are analog and single-ended, so there is no integrated DAC on board or streaming or anything like that. And given that 1300 euros and dollars is not a small price, what can you expect when it comes to its performance? When I hooked Menuetto to my own room setup, the first thing that I noticed is how good its tonality actually is. We are talking about really well-balanced tonality with slight warmth in the bass and the mid-bass section, but it's really slight, and I would not call this amplifier bassy. But everything I was listening through it sounded positively juicy and bold down below, and that feeling continued for vocals, both female and male vocals, that sounded positively bold and just full and palpable. But the very positive thing to mention here is that that kind of warmth is not veiling or hazing fine detailing. So throughout the spectrum, going from the bass line and into the mid-bass and especially mid-range and highs, I never had a feeling that any fine detailing and detail retrieval and tone textures, subtle tone textures, are sacrificed because that warmth is spilling over them and it's muddying them. it's just not happening. There is plenty of detail retrieval and plenty of fast transients and snappiness in the mid-range and highs. But also, when I said that the tonality of this amp is great, those details and those quick transients, they are never harsh and never edgy. There is always that kind of laid back and natural character to the tone of this amp that never feels like all of that is thrown in your face and that it might tire you after prolonged music listening. But moving away from tonality itself, a big chunk of that pleasantness, I believe, comes from how the Menuetto handles time domain information. So tones have that sort of natural flow. They are snappy and highly revealing when they need to be, but tones have natural time decay. There's good tone trail in time, cymbals, drums, guitar plucks, piano, keys, everything has that good, nice vibrancy and decay in time. And not all amps can offer that to the same extent. Next, the sound staging is quite decent. The sheer width is not huge, but the sensation of depth and layering and just separation and pinpointing is very good. And tones inside that sound stage have good size. They are of a believable, realistic size, and they feel three-dimensional and palpable. And that is always helped when we have that healthy low end. And also that healthy tone decay in time. Those vibrations and those reverbs and echoes, they paint three-dimensional image. Without them, tones can appear flat, both spatially and tonally, but with Menuetto we have that vibrant, pretty decently three-dimensional soundstage. And the only thing that I could notice listening to it in isolation that is not absolutely top is that sheer dynamics and big dynamic swings and just kick is not the strongest suit of this amp. Let me explain it this way. If you listen to some low-key music genres, music that I probably like the most, some late-night jazz and vocals and acoustic music, this amp will sound authoritative, bold, well-balanced. There is even quite good authority in its bass line. It has meat on its bones, and in those situations, in those music genres, I never thought that this is underpowered amp. Only when I was trying to play something like this, for example electronic music, something with lots of bass and lots of slam, and the music that is generally listened with high SPL, in a way that you want some excitement, you want the sound to punch you in the guts, and you want to impress your friends and annoy your neighbors. In songs like this, you could notice that Menuetto actually sounds a little bit rounded and milder, and it doesn't really do explosive slams and kicks the way that a couple hundred of watts would do. So if that kind of excitement is what you're after for, I don't know, techno, drum and bass, heavy metal or something like that, you would probably not get what you need from this amp. But for everything else, being like just a normal rock and roll, indie rock, pop, jazz, blues, vocal music and acoustic music, this simply sounds splendidly natural, and I never noticed that it lacks any energy or power. And this leads me to a comparison with a more affordable amp, but it's a Class D from Topping PA7 Plus. This on paper has some 200 something watts, which means it should be more powerful, even though it's really small, because it's Class D. And it measures extremely well. And going by that spec sheet and those numbers alone, you would expect this one to be clearly a better amp. But the thing is that real life is a little bit more complicated than spec sheets. So this one is $550 and I really love it. For its price, this is a fantastic sounding amp that has clean, precise sound, and it's also smooth. It sounds natural in a way that earlier Class D amps could not. They were often harsh and dry, and Topping doesn't have that problem. When you listen to it in isolation, it sounds perfectly natural and clean and has very good sound staging and dark background. But when I moved from Menuetto here to PA7 Plus directly, I noticed that something in the sounds suddenly became stiffer. I couldn't find better word than stiff. Many tones like drums and strings that sounded naturally spongy and springy with Menuetto suddenly sounded more stiff with PA7 Plus. And after doing some listening with several songs, I realized why is that? Because that natural tone decay that I was mentioning with Menuetto, that feeling of tone having a trail, having very nice reverberant kind of sound, that is shorter with Topping. Tones start, they're clean, they're precise, they're not even harsh or edgy, if you would expect that from Class D. This is a very smooth sounding amp, but then they disappear suddenly in a way that feels slightly unnatural and stiff. Like something is choking the tone trail before it should be choked. Because in real life, if you go to a jazz club or any sort of concert or just listen to your friend playing acoustic guitar, tones have long trails before they completely disappear, and that part is presented in a more natural and believable way with Menuetto than it is with Topping PA7 Plus. Everything else is quite similar. The other biggest difference is that Menuetto has fuller, juicier bass line. But the thing is that that bass line with Menuetto is not less revealing because of that. You hear all the same notes, you listen to a double bass or any bass line in any song, and it will feel really precise and well presented, well controlled with PA7. But it will feel equally precise and with equally good timing with Menuetto, just slightly bolder. Now, when you combine that bass line and mid-bass boldness with that longer tone trail, to my ears, Menuetto sounds more lifelike and more natural, and it doesn't come with any negatives. If anything, the fine detail retrieval might be even slightly better on Menuetto, but that's mostly comparable, that's just nitpicking. PA7 is a really revealing and clean sounding amp, but the biggest difference comes from that tonality and how they handle aftertones. Now, if that's worth more than twice the price for Menuetto is a very personal thing. If I had to choose one of these to drive my daily setup with my speakers, which are great and resolving, and my own DAC, so basically for my own system, I would say, yeah, no problem, I would pay that extra cost for Menuetto, because that kind of natural tone flow means to me quite a bit. But on the other hand, if you're assembling a budget system with some budget speakers, it might happen that you don't notice that much with, I don't know, some Wharfedale Diamonds or Monitor Audio Bronze. The less resolving the speaker is, the less resolving your source, like your CD player, your DAC, is, there's also less chance for you to be able to differentiate these two. And I think that in those kind of systems, people will claim things like this topping is a giant killer that sounds exactly the same as something like this, or maybe Atoll in 100, etc. But in a better system, they do not sound the same. And I applaud PA7 to be like at 85-90% of this one, but it's not the same. Oh, by the way, when it comes to power, this one, as I said, has 200 something watts on paper, and you cannot really notice that. When you crank them up, they both lack a little bit of slam and kick and authority. I mentioned that in PA7's review. That was basically the only thing that I said is not that great. It's a very clean sounding amp, but it doesn't have a huge dynamic swings and authority of bigger amps. And neither does Menuetto here, by the way. But looking at their spec sheets, you would expect Topping to have it, and it doesn't. I will not go into theorizing about why is that. Maybe it's because Topping actually cannot deliver more amperes to your speakers than this one. And heavy load speakers, they often have impedances that dip very low, especially in bass region. And to have authoritative bass and kick and slam, you need to have very current capable amp. And some big and authoritative amps can deliver like 40 amperes if needed at their max to speakers. The whole power supply for PA7 Plus can deliver only 6 or something amperes. So not all watts are created equal. It matters if wattage comes from voltage or if it comes from amperes. It matters how that power behaves when you connect different speakers with different impedance curves, different dips and different peaks. All of that influences how amps behave and how much power they can deliver in some particular scenario. And in most of these real-life scenarios, you will feel that these two amps are quite equally powerful. But all that talk of power leads me to the next comparison. Well, it's not a comparison, it's just a comment. Because I'm sorry to say that I don't have Atoll in 100 anymore with me that I reviewed, or Rega Brio amp, for example, because both of these cost the same as Dayens Menuetto, and I can only draw something from my memory and compare this one to those by using some joint proxy like PA7 Plus here, for example. And I would say that Rega Brio had equally, similarly full-bodied tonality, but it was just not as revealing and as refined sounding as Menuetto here. This one it has more of that small, tiny detailing in the mid-range, in the upper registers. There's a little bit more air, more of that textured information on top of it. And I believe that if I had the chance to compare them directly, Menuetto here would prove to be a more resolving and more refined amp. But tonality and that slightly warm and bold character is quite similar. And then Atoll in 100 is the last one that it would be nice to compare this one with. Atoll in 100 is one really powerful, really authoritative amp. It has something like 100 watts per channel, but it sounded much more authoritative than I would expect from that wattage. More authoritative than Menuetto, and definitely more authoritative than Topping PA7 and then Hegel H90 that I used to own for a year. And that Atoll had also wider, airier soundstage and better just dynamics and grunt. What it did lack a little bit was refinement. It could be a little bit harsh at times, and it also leans more toward brightness. So some attention with pairing is needed with Atoll in 100. that is not needed with Menuetto here. This one is fully natural and musical sounding, and it will not provoke any speakers, which is something that can happen easily with In100. And for example, when I paired that amp with bright and slightly aggressive sounding Triangle Borea 3, that was a really harsh and slightly annoying pairing. That's something that you have to be aware of if you're aiming for Atoll. It's more powerful, more dynamic sounding amp with more slam and drive, but it's not as refined and as tonally mature as Dayens Menuetto. And that leads me to the conclusion. For this amount of money, you can buy the amp that's more powerful, that has more drive, like Atoll In100. You can also buy something that has just more features. Some digital section with digital inputs, or subwoofer output, or balanced inputs. But if you only need an analog integrated amplifier for your speakers, and you don't listen to those music genres that depend on explosive dynamics and high sound levels, then this is the one that you should seriously consider at this price point. And what else to say? It seems that these old Class AB designs, when done right and with competence, still have their place under the sun, and they can still be a very, very desirable purchase. And that's all. I hope you like this video. See you next time. Bye.